I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine that you are on an airplane and you're a single parent taking your son, Timmy, on a vacation of a lifetime. And as you look at him in the airplane, all of a sudden it hits a pocket of turbulence and it starts to go down. When the airplane crashes, you lose conscience. As the airplane crashes, you pass out. And when you come to slowly, you see a humanoid creature grab the one thing that you were swearing to yourself that you'd protect for your entire life and take him away. You wake up to see that you are the sole survivor of the airplane crash. And now you have to survive, and your one and only end game goal is to find Timmy. You'd probably think that I'm talking about a story-based single-player game when I tell you that this is the opening cutscene to the game we're talking about today, but in actuality, I'm talking about my personal favorite video game of all time, The Forest. The Forest is a survival horror video game developed by End Night Games, I believe, and it takes place on a very, very remote and forested island in the peninsula. You play as Eric LeBlanc, looking for his son Timmy, who was kidnapped and taken somewhere on this island. The game is extremely open. There's almost no linear gameplay aspects to it. It's an open world, environmental, survival-based, first-person video game that originally had an early access beta in 2014 and was finally fully released in April of 2018. I'd be surprised if most people haven't heard of The Forest. This game was pretty much everywhere in 2014 and in 2018. I specifically remember, I want to say it was either Markiplier or Jacksepticeye did a video on The Forest, maybe even PewDiePie did. It was some huge YouTuber at the time who did like gameplay videos, did a video on The Forest, and I remember seeing it and instantly being intrigued by it. Survival games for me are always tricky because they kind of land in one of two camps. They're either completely open world with absolutely no story. They do have end credit scenes if you beat like a certain boss or two, but otherwise it's a completely open, randomly generated sandbox for you to do literally anything that you could think of. The other camp is it's still an open world experience. It's not randomly generated, so most of the stuff is always in the same place, and there is an overarching story. I personally enjoyed those survival games more, and that is exactly what The Forest is. But to me, I think that the best aspect of this game is its overarching story mixed with its insanely fun and repetitive gameplay loop. Gameplay loops are the most important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to open world games, because you can't have it too repetitive. Otherwise, people are not going to want to do the same thing over and over and over again. But for me, The Forest is one of those games that I could genuinely start up a new playthrough and play through the entire game multiple times a year because I can just do things differently every single time. The map doesn't change every time you create a new world. The items don't vary from every single playthrough or anything like that. You always have the same things you can build, you always have the same tools you can use, and you always have the same end goal, which is finding Timmy. You basically have to create shelter, weapons, and a whole bunch of other survival tools to not only survive the environment, but to survive the mobs, aka the cannibals on the island. Now, you could play this game peacefully and just play it for the survival elements of crafting. It is an option. I've done it before. It's very relaxing, but I was also very, very stressed out because I know how insane the atmosphere of the base game is. You can also play The Forest in a VR mode, which is simply terrifying. It's absolutely insanely scary. Now, as you play The Forest, you'll realize that you can only run for a certain amount of time. You get thirsty very quickly. You get hungry. You can get poisoned. It can be too cold. It can be too hot. There's a lot of different elements to orchestrating a perfect survival game, and The Forest really knocks every single thing on that list. Now, for me, there's a lot of reasons why this game is my favorite game of all time. For me, it has to do with why I started playing the game in the first place. Back in 2018, me and two of my really, really good best friends really wanted a multiplayer game that we could just boot up, play for an endless amount of time that didn't even really have a story. We weren't focused on a story-based game. We found a way to make a pretty much an open server for the forest, and there was just the three of us against the world, and we were able to play the entire game in this co-op multiplayer way. Those few weeks of just grinding this game to the fullest, exploring every single inch of the island, every cave, every cannibal location, literally the entire map we covered in a few weeks time span just because of school and work and other things. And it was honestly the fondest gaming memory I have out of any game. I think this game is also really hard if you're not really used to playing a more difficult game that on a like normal difficulty. Obviously, a lot of games skew their difficulty differently. I think that normal on this game is plenty hard enough. The like super hard nightmare mode, whatever it's called, is definitely the hardest I've ever experienced in a game besides like the From Software games. I think it's incredibly difficult. That's mostly just because for me, I'm not the greatest at video games. Now, the cannibals are a whole other aspect of this game that just fascinates me because there's so many different mutations to them that are honestly terrifying. Like you have the ones that will run away from you. You have the ones that will sprint at you immensely. You have the weird like boss-like spider mutations that are crazy. And then you have that end game mutation, which is just one of the scariest bosses I think I've ever encountered in a game. And even with 3 people, it was difficult. And it's crazy to say that the plot for this game keeps you hooked while also not having you have to be having your hand held the entire time. That sentence didn't really make a lot of sense. This game takes I like to say the BioShock audio log approach, where there's not really a lot of audio logs in this game, but instead you find photos that hint at a lot of different things to come in the game. For example, pretty early on, you can find it's almost beached, it's very close, a little ship that you can swim to, and you'll find pictures of other people and hints about what happened to the people that arrive on that boat. And then one of the first kind of big mutation bosses that you can find pretty close. But these photographs are a huge way of linking the plot together, and I think that is such a smart thing to do. On top of that, this game actually has 2 different endings that you get to choose from. The first one, I'm not sure if it's the canon ending. I want to say it is because it kind of makes the most sense, while the second one explains more why you stay on the island after the credits roll. I'm not going to really go into detail about them because I personally think that the first ending of the game is something that people should really experience for themselves. But it's crazy because the game doesn't punish you for picking either of them. I think that both of them really, you're able to make the decision based on your own life experience and what you deem morally correct, which I think is awesome. The atmosphere of this game is also just something that fascinates me for the time. Again, this game came out originally in 2014. Now, I didn't play it until 2018, so I can't really speak for how the early access went, but the fact that this game is almost a decade old and the atmosphere is still better than 85 to 90% of the horror games that we get today, or even just the games that we get today. It fascinates me. It's like I said in Still Wakes the Deep in that video review, I think that the atmosphere in that game is top tier. I don't think that it is really outdone by much other. The Forest is in that same category, but I think it's done even more so to where you can get fully lost in any world that you create, and the entire time you're looking over your shoulder, you're hearing all of the little rustles and everything. And again, I think it's a tone to the location that they picked being a forest island, but I think that just doing that, there's so much that can go wrong, and I personally think it all went right. But yeah, so The Forest is my favorite game of all time, and I'm always going to really appreciate this game. I'm always going to be replaying it. You can find me playing it usually once a year. Playing it just for this video made me feel super nostalgic, even though I don't think the game is old enough to be nostalgic feeling about. I think I'm eventually going to do a video on Sons of the Forest. I actually still haven't played it. I played it for a few few minutes with one of my really, really good friends who I originally played the first Forest with, but my PC at the time couldn't really handle that game. My new one definitely can, but I just haven't really had the time to do it. I'm interested to see how that game holds up compared to this one, but man, if you haven't played the Forest and you're really into survival-based games, I would definitely check it out. I will say it does have a lot of horror elements, and it is considered a horror survival game, so if you're a little more squeamish and not that into horror games, I would just tell you that they are an aspect of this game, but there is, like I said, there is a peaceful mode. I don't know how the story kind of progresses that way. I want to say it's probably still the same, but yeah, this game's also really cheap all the time. It's either always on sale or it's defaultly just a super cheap game. So if you're just kind of waiting like I am for that mid-September time frame where we get a bunch of games, definitely check it out if you can. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. If, like I said, if you want to check out this game, or if you have checked out this game, let me know in the comment section below what you think about it, because again, this is my favorite game of all time. Doesn't mean it has to be yours, so I'd love to hear some negatives that people have. I definitely have my gripes with this game, but I think everything else just outshines those gripes. Anyways, this has been Nate, otherwise known as Whikked, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.